Hello, and welcome back to Click Revision. This is the last of our videos on the characters in Inspector Calls, and this time it's a little different, because we're talking about a character who isn't actually seen in the play, only mentioned, and of course that character is Eva Smith. We'll be looking at what sort of person she is, how she spent the last 2 years of her life, and how she fits into the lives of each of the other characters. We'll also look at what she represents and why she is important to the narrative of An Inspector Calls. So what do we actually know about Eva Smith? Well, quite a lot actually. There are lots and lots of tiny bits of information we can pull out of every other character's account of their experiences with her. And the Inspector offers us a fair amount of information from Eva Smith's diary. For example, Gerald tells us that Eva Smith has soft brown hair and big dark eyes. Meanwhile, Sheila's main memory of Eva Smith is that she's pretty, and that's something everyone basically agrees on. Sheila uses the word 3 times, and Eva is also described as pretty by Gerald, Eric, and the Inspector throughout the course of the play, while Mr. Burling calls her good-looking. If we remember back to Sheila's account, it was Eva Smith being more attractive than Sheila that caused Sheila's strop in the first place, so she was striking enough to make other women jealous of her. So, now we know what she looks like, let's go back to our timeline and try to flesh out her last couple of years and build a better picture of her as we go. We know from Mr. Burling that Eva Smith was working at Burling & Company until September 1910. We aren't told how long she'd been working at the factory, but we can assume she hasn't always lived in Brumley. Burling calls her country bred, so she was probably raised in a rural area. This, along with the manual factory work, makes her firmly working class. We also know from the Inspector that both her parents are dead, so that she had no home to go back to after she was sacked by Burling. So she was stuck in Brumley looking for a new job. As Inspector Gould tells Sheila, after 2 months, with no work, no money coming in, and living in lodgings with no relatives to help her, few friends, lonely, half-starved, she was feeling desperate. So we also know that she was a bit of a loner, and that she didn't have much support. Luckily, around this time, December 1910, she manages to get a job at Millward's, which is a fairly posh department store. The Inspector is unsure of what name she's using at this time. She works there for about 2 months and is fired in January 1911 when she meets Sheila Burling. So, after losing 2 jobs, Eva Smith decided she might as well try another kind of life, according to the Inspector. It's around this time that she changes her name to Daisy Renton, because that's the name that Gerald knows her as when he meets her in March 1911. Gerald describes Eva Smith as young and pretty and warm-hearted, and she's younger than Gerald. She's about the same age as Eric in her early 20s. But the warm-hearted bit is also important, because it's Eva Smith's good nature that often gets her into trouble. She gets fired from Burling & Company for supporting her fellow workers on strike. She's fired from Millward's for smiling. She falls in love with Gerald. And she lets Eric into her house against her better judgment. So this aspect of her personality plays a strong role in driving the narrative forward. By the time Daisy Renton meets Gerald, she's incredibly poor and actually hungry. He takes pity on her and gives her the keys to his friend's home while his friend is overseas. Gerald also gives her regular money with which to take care of herself. Daisy, of course, falls in love with Gerald. She's a romantic person. But Gerald tells the Inspector, "I didn't feel about her as she felt about me." Their affair lasts until the first week of September, when Gerald breaks up with her. Gerald tells us that at this time, she'd been happier than she'd ever been before, but that she knew it couldn't last, hadn't expected it to last. And she'd saved a little money during the summer. She'd lived very economically on what I'd allowed her. So Eva Smith was in love with Gerald, but knew that the affair couldn't last, so she saved some money. Basically, this tells us that by this time she's already been let down by life so many times that she expects it. She doesn't expect to be happy anymore. Gerald says she didn't blame me at all, which both speaks to Daisy's good nature and her lack of self-confidence. When Gerald breaks up with her, Daisy feels lost. And she goes away to the seaside for a couple of months just to make it last longer, returning around November 1911. This is when she meets Eric, so she's still on the rebound, and she must be really lonely at this point because Eric isn't nearly as handsome or rich or successful or sober as Gerald is. Eric and Daisy meet several times over the course of the next month or two, and she discovers she's pregnant around the end of 1911. It's not clear what name she's using at this time, because Eric was too drunk to remember it after the first night they spent together and apparently never bothered to ask again. She shows her romantic side again here, ironically by refusing to marry Eric because he doesn't love her. She also shows a great deal of honour and virtue by ending the relationship in March 1912. At this point, Daisy decides she doesn't want to take any more stolen money from Eric, and she decides not to see him again. She's so miserable and lost that she'd rather just not have him around than have his theft on her conscience, even though he is able to provide for her and the baby. She basically cuts ties with her only means of support, which we would recognise today as being a sign of severe depression. So finally, with nowhere else to turn, in late March, Daisy Renton goes to visit Mrs. Burling's charity to ask for support. Her first mistake, calling herself Mrs. Burling, is totally understandable given the context of the situation. Daisy didn't want to give her real name, and wanted to look married so she could appeal to the snobby upper-class ladies on the charity committee, so she used the first name she thought of, which was Eric's. But after this first misstep, she has no chance of getting on Mrs. Burling's good side, so she's turned away. We don't know what Daisy Renton did with the last 2 weeks of her life, but we can assume she spiraled further and further into depression before finally choosing to kill herself because she'd been turned out and turned down too many times. This was the end, the inspector tells us, adding, she died in misery and agony, hating life, and this really shows in her method of death. She drank disinfectant or bleach, which is a truly horrific, drawn-out and painful way to die. So that's everything we know about the last few years of her life. But what does Eva Smith represent beyond just being the dead girl in the play? Well, her name itself tells us quite a lot. Smith is the most common English surname. Over 1% of English people are called Smith, so we know Priestley doesn't want her to stand out. In fact, you could argue that by changing her name so much, Eva Smith was trying to make herself stand out from being so common. Also, her first name, Eva, is not unlike Eve, the first woman in the Bible, and this is very deliberate on J.B. Priestley's part. Eva Smith is not just one unfortunate young woman who plays a role in a story. She's designed to represent every person like her. She's what we call an everywoman. The everyman or everywoman figure is supposed to stand in for anyone from the same background. In this case, she represents the working class people who don't get the support from society that they need. This is why it's really important that we don't see her in the play and can't attach a face to her. She's supposed to be more than just one person. And this is one aspect of the play in which film and television adaptations usually completely miss the point, simply because it would be too theatrical not to show her as a real character. Eva Smith is a symbol of the underprivileged and the lost and the forgotten at the bottom rung of the social ladder. This couldn't be more clear when you consider the inspector's departing speech to the Burling family. But just remember this. One Eva Smith has gone, but there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us, with their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering and chance of happiness, all intertwined with our lives and what we think and say and do. So there isn't just one Eva Smith. There's a sea of Eva Smiths, male and female, who are all underprivileged and lost and who could really use the support of anyone rich and privileged enough to offer some support. Just look at how Eva Smith is treated in the narrative of An Inspector Calls. All the men exploit her, in Burling's case for money and sexual gratification for the other two men. Meanwhile, both Sheila and Mrs. Burling judge her, and as Priestley sees it, the attitudes of the Burling family highlight the attitude of upper-class people towards working-class people in general. In this sense, the Burlings haven't just doomed one girl, but by extension they jeopardise the lives of any working-class person who they have any sort of dealings with, because they just don't think about them as people. The closest analogue to Eva Smith in the play, that is, the most similar other character to whom we can compare her, is Sheila, and as audience members we are meant to compare them. Sheila, with the rich parents, the secure life, the nice engagement ring, who gets everything she wants without really trying, and Eva Smith, with the dead parents, few friends and nobody to support her, penniless, and for whom everything seems to go wrong even when she tries to change. Sheila and all young women like her have opportunities in life, while the Eva Smiths of this world just have to do what they can to survive. Of course, Priestley wants us to have sympathy for Eva Smith and everyone like her, but you're only going to offer her that sympathy if you believe she's real. So it's a bit strange that by the end of the play, We're left unsure if Eva Smith ever actually existed, if she was the same person as Daisy Renton, or the nameless girls who met Eric or Mrs. Burling, or even if the inspector showed each of the characters a different photograph. When the final curtain closes, we know someone has died from drinking disinfectant. But is the girl in the morgue the same girl as Eva Smith, or a different person entirely? This is a bit of misdirection on Priestley's part. The section of the play after the inspector leaves gives the other characters enough room, once they've stopped blaming each other, to begin to question the guilt they've had thrown at them. After all, given the choice, you'd rather not feel guilty about something for the rest of your life if you can just brush it under the carpet instead. The writer is making another point about class attitudes here, that the older Burlings would rather learn nothing from the experience than accept responsibility for other members of society, in stark contrast to Eric and Sheila, who have certainly learned something from the experience. In the end, it doesn't really matter if Eva Smith is real or not, alive or dead, because whether the inspector has manipulated the Burlings in an honest or a dishonest way, he has compelled each member of the Burling family to admit that they have in some way lived a selfish life at the expense of someone less fortunate. Burling sacked someone to save money. Sheila took her bad mood out on someone and had her fired. Gerald used someone as his mistress and then discarded her. Eric possibly assaulted someone, got her pregnant, and tried to buy his way out of it with stolen money. And Mrs. Burling saw someone in need and chose to look down on them and not help. By forcing each of the Burlings to come clean about their past actions, so J.B. Priestley forces each member of the audience to reconsider their actions in the future and approach the subject of class with less snobbery than the Burling family shows. Thanks for watching. That's it for all the characters in An Inspector Calls. Next up, we're going to begin looking in more detail at some of the main themes in the play, beginning with social class and power. But we'd recommend attempting to write a few sentences in answer to each of these questions before you move on. Question 1. What sort of person was Eva Smith? Try to pick 5 words or phrases and explain why you've chosen them with reference to the text. Question 2. What happened when? Draw a timeline of Eva Smith's encounters with the Burling, and then flesh it out into full sentences. Question 3. Did any of the characters make Eva Smith happy? Write a defence of any character you feel did more than simply hurt or exploit her.